Is ketosis dangerous? I think I've covered this long enough. However, we need to get ChatGPT's opinion on this. Because of course, as we know, AI is always correct about everything. And also all AI is the same, when in reality, no, it's not. There's Meta AI now, there's Grok, there's ChatGPT, there's others like Claude as well that I've heard of. There's a lot of them. Gemini, Google Gemini, they're all different. They all respond differently. It's pretty impressive. But I like to stick to the old trusty ChatGPT. I think of ChatGPT as the prototype of AI. And of course, like I said, ChatGPT is always correct about everything. So what we need to do is we need to argue with it today. We need to argue with it. Okay? Because putting the joke aside, it's not right about everything at all. But sometimes it is right. Sometimes you get lucky. So let's waste no further time here and ask it the age-old question. Is ketosis... Okay, so if I can type... Okay, ketosis is not inherently dangerous. It's actually a normal metabolic state, but context matters. Actually, so far, that's actually true. Let's continue. When ketosis is not dangerous. Oh, so there's a time when it's dangerous. Interesting. Depending on how you look at it, sure. Yes. Actually, you know what? That's acceptable. That is acceptable. There is a distinction. Let's see what it says. Ketosis occurs when your body burns fat for fuel instead of carbs, producing ketones. Yes, but it also uses those ketone bodies that are produced in the liver. A lot of people don't know that the reason that ketones are even produced in the first place is because the liver takes on so much fat during times of being fasted that it actually cannot keep up with converting the fat into ATP. Ketones are a shuttling pathway for any excess that it can't deal with. And then they're released in the forms of beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate, as well as some acetone, but very little, into the bloodstream. And then they're taken up by any cell that is in need of ATP production. That's basically how it works. So muscle cells and skeletal muscle cells, and even the heart, by the way. In fact, the failing heart relies on ketone bodies, it seems, for ATP. So this happens during low-carb, high-fat diets, e.g. ketogenic diet. Yes, as long as it has sufficient fat to even use for ketone production. Fasting, yes, but of course fasting is a relative term. What do we mean by fasting? It's an interesting, I mean, for the most part, sure, fine. Prolonged exercise. Well, that's an interesting one because actually during prolonged exercise, you start to oxidize pyruvate, so glucose. You can actually measure this via a respiratory exchange ratio with respiratory gas analysis during an exercise. And it's because you produce so much pyruvate during very intense resistance training that you outweigh the chemical pressure of fatty acids and ketones. And by the way, when you're oxidizing pyruvate, you can still oxidize ketones intermittently, kind of thing. They enter through passive diffusion through the cell and the mitochondria. No transporters involved. Okay, periods of carbohydrate restriction. Yes, ketogenic diet. So it already covered that. That's fine. Yep. For most healthy people, okay, define healthy people, nutritional ketosis is safe and even beneficial. Really? Well, that is technically an opinion. ChatGPT. It can help with fat loss. Yes, if you're using fat for fuel, what do you think is going to happen to the fat on your body? First of all, it stimulates satiety, so you're not going to eat as often. And of course, for the people that believe in calories in, calories out, you won't be eating as many calories, so you'll be in a calorie deficit more easily, which that's just nonsense. But anyway, you do overall tend to eat less food, but it's not just about the amount, it's about the frequency as well. And so, yes, you'll be tapping into your own fat stores subsequently more easily than if you were eating carbohydrates, especially refined ones, without any associated fat or protein that will lead to a spike in glucose and then a dip that seems to be too low, and then reactive hypoglycemia kind of thing. It stimulates appetite and bop, 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 bop. Did you like that? Okay. Stabilizing blood sugar. Yes, for the exact reasons that I actually just laid out. Bop, 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 bop. You're not eating glucose. So what's going to happen to your glucose levels? They're going to stabilize. Gluconeogenesis. The production of endogenous glucose with non-glucose precursors, such as amino acids, glycerol, odd-chain fatty acids, and lactate during exercise. Reducing hunger, I just covered that in the beginning. Lots of protein, lots of fat. Those are, first of all, more slowly digested, but not only that, they stimulate a hormonal status that is conducive to maintaining satiety. So stimulating it first and foremost, and then maintaining it, as opposed to carbohydrates with the insulin to glucagon effects. Possibly improving brain function. Yes, possibly. Yes, it may or may not. Ketone levels in this state are usually 0.5 to 3.0 millimoles per liter. Yes, correct. When ketosis can be dangerous. The dangerous version is called ketoacidosis, not nutritional ketosis. Correct. Ketoacidosis basically is where you produce too many ketones because of an immense amount of fatty acid oxidation, and in order to compensate for lowering of blood glucose levels, as well as this counterproductive kind of thing that's happening. And it's not the body's fault, it's the person's fault for not consuming frickin' food. But anyway, you get so much that it affects the what's called the ATOT concentration, one of the 4 independent variables of pH regulation or fluctuation, and that will cause a decrease in blood pH. In order to compensate, your body starts to excrete a lot of carbon dioxide. There's a specific kind of breathing that's involved. I'll put it on the screen because I can't remember it right now, but it's a way of the body trying to excrete one of the other main independent factors of pH, that being carbon dioxide, because water, aqueous solutions function as a solvent for carbon dioxide, and that lowers pH. So it's just a way of trying to compensate. It's really bad. You'll have a fruity smell on your breath if you have ketoacidosis because of acetone productions. They go way up as well from acetoacetate conversion in the bloodstream. It's just this really bad issue. It does not happen when you don't consume carbs. It happens during starvation, by the way, like actual bona fide starvation. So diabetic ketoacidosis. Yes, sorry. Forgot to even mention that. Type 1 diabetics can have it as well because they have insulin problems. They can have extremely high blood glucose and extremely high ketone levels in the blood. That probably doesn't do very well for their blood viscosity, especially the glucose. Not good. They're both water soluble though. Yes, but whenever these people do not inject their insulin, you can have a low glucose availability, so low energy availability, and you have a buildup of glucose in the bloodstream. And then what happens is it puts a chemical pressure to increase fatty acid oxidation to such an extent that you get too many ketones produced. And again, I keep saying too many. The body is producing exactly how many it needs to produce to try and counteract the lack of energy production. The problem is that you have not injected insulin to usher glucose into cells for use. So anyway, happens mostly in people with type 1 diabetes, rarely type 2. You're not really going to get it in type 2 diabetes, unless it basically turns into type 1. Caused by lack of insulin. Glucose can't enter cells, fat breakdown, excessive ketones. Yes, exactly. Blood becomes too acidic. Yes, ketone levels greater than 10 millimoles per liter. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, you got a problem there. In fact, I would actually expect the level to be even lower than that for it to be characterized as ketoacidosis, but I could be wrong. Can be life-threatening, yes. Alcoholic ketoacidosis can occur in people who drink heavily, don't eat, and become malnourished. There you go. So it's basically a subgroup of ketoacidosis. Okay, risks for certain people. Ketosis might be risky if you have type 1 diabetes due to diabetic ketoacidosis risk. Yes, sure. Pancreatic disorders. Yes, again, that goes right back with the type 1 diabetes. You got insulin issues. Liver disease, that's an interesting one. Let me try and think of a mechanism. Maybe it has to do with lack of sufficient glucose production. Maybe it has to do with the fact that, oh, you know what? It probably has to do with the fact that if you have liver disease, your ability to convert fat into ATP might be impaired. And so it'll shuttle most of the acetyl-CoA towards the ketone pathway. Maybe. Again, this is all just speculative based on my knowledge of biochemistry. Rare metabolic disorders like carnitine deficiency. Carnitine is involved in fatty acid oxidation as well. It's particularly involved in the migration, the activation of fats for ATP production. You know what? There you go. That would be your reason. Because instead of fat being used to produce ATP, it's producing ketones. There you go. Okay. Pregnancy, especially during gestational diabetes. That's weird. Again, what? Lower blood glucose? Maybe? I'm not really familiar with that. Maybe I'm stupid. Maybe I'm really stupid, guys, for not knowing that. But anyway, fine. Bottom line, for most people, ketosis via diet or fasting is safe and can be beneficial as long as it's done correctly and under supervision if you have medical conditions. Want to know if it's a good idea for you specifically? Well, funny you mention that, ChatGPT, because it's actually indicated for us to be in the majority of the time. That is right. Our species-appropriate, species-specific diet is something that is conducive to allowing us to be in a ketogenic, ketotic, really is what we should say, state for the majority of the time. However, it is not a diet that leaves you in it 24/7, or else stuff like that can happen. Ketoacidosis, actual bona fide starvation can happen, because we have to remember that ketogenesis is a catabolic process, and catabolism eventually leads to erosion and degradation. Anabolism, insulin being the prototypical hormone of, is something that is not only, well, it's essential. It's essential. Our bodies wouldn't produce insulin if anabolism were always a bad thing. Okay, so it's important to be in an anabolic episode for a few hours after you consume food, particularly a sufficient bolus of protein to stimulate things like thyroid hormone production and function, electrolyte maintenance, and other hormone production, actually, it seems. Testosterone being one as well. So, with that being said, join me next time when we argue, or perhaps agree. Luckily, this time it was an agreement with ChatGPT, or any of the other AIs, actually, because, again, they're not all the same. So, till then.